Welcome back, everybody. Please feel free to use the chat box. Let us know where you are from, what chapter you belong to, what chapter you want to belong to. If you don't belong to one, we can certainly help you out with that. I see lots of you rolling in here, so we'll give it a couple minutes just to get everybody in and settled. Looking forward to seeing you all in the chat box. There you go. Awesome. North Carolina, Minneapolis. Hey, Donna, nice to see you, or see your text. Virginia, New York, Seattle. Awesome. If you're just joining us, just throw into the chat box where you're from, where your local chapter is. If you're not a member, that's okay. We can change that for you. Awesome to see so many people come back. We kind of snuck this into your calendars. So thanks for coming back for some Q&A. Lots of familiar faces here. We'll just give it one more quick minute and then we'll kick off. Awesome, let's do this. Corinne, let's go.
Awesome. So welcome everyone. If you joined us for the session on Tuesday with Steve Kimball and Sara Grauf, thank you so much for being there. We had over 1,100 people register for that session, which was so great to see. It tells us that event profs are eager and ready to talk about the future and the recovery in our industry. The conversation on Tuesday was an excellent start, but we saw tons of questions that didn't get answers. So our hope is to continue that conversation today and see where we can get. Our commitment is to compile all of the questions and considerations about the future of events from Tuesday's call and from today's call, and to share it with our members so that we can be proactive and as prepared as possible moving forward. We are also sharing with our members the exclusive Event Safety Alliance guidance to the grand reopening, which is being released on Monday. So watch for your inbox for that as well. ILEA is focused on ensuring our members are set up for success as best as possible as we head towards recovery. So in an effort to have as much time as possible for today's conversation, let's get started by reviewing some logistics for today's call. The chat box, as you can see, is for any thoughts and comments, and if you want to ask questions among the group. The Q&A is for questions that you would like answered by the panel. And there's also a like button now in the Q&A so that you can push a question to the top instead of asking the same question again, so you can move things through the queue faster. The meeting today is being recorded and will be shared on ileahub.com tomorrow in the resources page. And I would like to now today introduce our moderators, Sara Grauf and Dustin Westling. Sara is the Senior Vice President of Event Strategy and Services for the San Francisco Giants. And Sara is also our ILEA International Immediate Past Chair. And Dustin of Westling is the Managing Partner of One West Event Design and Logistics, and is one of our ILEA International Board of Governors as well as a director. Sara, Dustin, thanks for leading this, and over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Corinne. Great to have everybody back. I see we got a good number of you back, which just tells us that there's lots more questions to be answered. And Sara and I are going to do our best to answer the questions that were left over, take any new questions that you might have. Corinne mentioned the Q&A box. Feel free to use that. If you have other general comments or want to add any insight, use the chat box for that. This is a community, so let's share as much as we can. One of the purposes of this call or this webinar is to gather information about where we still need to find more education and information. So, so don't hold back. Tell us what's going on in your communities. Tell us what information you still need to know, what you're really hungry to learn about, so that we can take that information away and make sure that programming over the next couple months, which I think is going to be really critical for a lot of you that are looking at the grand reopening, whatever that is, to help you in your businesses. So Sara, let's kick it off.
Sure. I think we kind of went through some of the questions that were remaining after the last chat on Tuesday, and there were a couple themes that started to resonate. Food and beverage is obviously a big one. We're seeing a lot in the venue space, probably because most events use a venue. And so I think what we're going to do is try to tackle some of those. We just kind of want to caveat this with, obviously, you know, we don't have all the answers necessarily. We may not have any answers, but what we can do is kind of share with you the information that we're having from other conversations, what we're hearing from industry leaders and professionals, and hopefully at least get you connected with the right people or give you a really good sense of where those resources are. So kind of to kick it off, there were, and certainly if you're a caterer or anything and you're attending this call, by all means, pipe in. We want to make this as interactive as we can, which is why it's more of a boutique conversation. But to talk specifically about, let's start with venues first. There are a lot of questions about restroom hygiene, first and foremost. That seems to be a big one for people because even as we're looking at drive-ins and that sort of thing, you know, that's something that is top of mind. From what I've at least seen, heard from other, you know, industry groups that are starting to put together guidelines and or leagues that are thinking about a lot of this is definitely the need for more regular cleaning and sanitization to a level that's different than it's been before. And also just looking at the numbers of people that you're putting through there. So just like any other space, you know, we need to make sure that we're not cramming a bunch of people in these facilities. The other thing that I think you're going to start seeing venues looking a little bit more at is what is the ventilation in some of these restrooms. You know, when you're in some places like hotels and other areas, it's not maybe the ideal situation. So even if there's some infrastructure changes that need to happen there, I think venue owners and operators are going to think really responsibly about how they're looking at that. This is also one where optics are going to be a big player. You know, in Vegas, you see a lot of restroom attendants. You are probably going to see a lot more people regularly staffed in restrooms than you ever did before. Now, does that potentially come at a cost because it means more labor and more materials? Absolutely. Is there a conversation that's definitely hot in terms of, does that just mean the venue price goes up, or is that something that an event planner or producer is going to get nickel and dimed for? You know, that's going to be up to the individual venues for how they want to price that. I think as much as we can be consistent as an industry would be great. And I think, you know, in my mind, at least, public health is something that should be a requirement for events. So it should be part of the cost of doing business if you're a venue, that you need to do your part to keep people safe, just like fire egress or anything else. There is a lot of discussion in the venue space around electrostatic cleaning. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that, there's a lot of new technology out around. It's basically like an aerosol spray. It almost looks like a hairdryer that you put on some things, and it has antibacterial properties in it that really assist with making sure that those times in between cleanings and other things that your venues are staying as clean as possible, I guess we should say. Some of the other things we're hearing a lot about is face masks. And is that a responsibility of venues to supply those? Or is that something that the producer should be doing? Or should attendees have the option of wearing face masks? I think with a lot of this stuff, you're going to see at least venues that are taking their responsibility seriously. They'll have it on site just in case, because they never want to be able to, you know, not furnish something for someone if needed. But I think these will be discussions that'll happen between the producers and the venues as we move forward. And I think there's certainly going to be regulations from all of your local health authorities as to what's going to be required and for how long. So if any of you who own, operate, or are just frequent venues have, you know, any thoughts or feedback in terms of what you've heard your venues discussing, by all means, please start to throw it in the chat as well. The other thing venues are looking closely at are definitely entrance procedures. And, you know, a lot of venues, everybody's coming in through one entrance point. Should we be looking at doing multiple entrance points? potentially, but then you also need to think about what are you giving up on the safety and security side if you have that many more doors to manage and everything else. So I think you're going to have to allow venues a little bit of time to figure some of this out. I know one of my good friends owns an event venue, and she asked me to take a look at it just to kind of put my eyeballs on some things. And one of the things that I actually suggested she do is change one whole wall into garage doors, basically, so that load in and load out could happen much faster to allow for better cleaning time in between events, and also just that fresh air coming in between. So again, you know, people might not be able to do all of this overnight, but I think you're going to find that people are really open to suggestions from other professionals in the industry. So I would encourage you to please come to your venues with ideas, because we need them. We can't look at everything just through our lens. Some of the other things on the, oh, this is a big one, fixed seating and social distancing. So there is a lot of conversation around, should we be just pulling out a third to a half of our seats, or what should we be doing? I personally don't think you're going to see that right away, because I think social distancing is a means to an end in a way, where it's certainly something we are going to have to focus on as we slowly reopen. But at some point, some events aren't going to work with social distancing. So if you look at major sporting events, if you took out every, 6 seats in between every patron, you're not creating the same environment. It's not going to be economically feasible. So at some point, there are going to have to be some adjustments, short of just saying we're cutting our numbers. So I think, again, that's one where there's going to be a long discussion around economic feasibility and how long the psychology is going to take for people to get back into events, to really figure out how drastic of changes you'll see at venues moving forward. Anything that people attending this conversation right now, specific to venues, have kind of heard pop up or have questions about? If you guys want to start populating those, well, maybe we can hop over to some of the basic food and beverage stuff as well, if you want, Dustin.
Sure. I think just one note on venues and washrooms. In most areas, the number of washrooms that you have is actually dictated by the local health authority or whoever's managing building codes. So I suspect that when it comes to washrooms, you will be required to provide more washrooms than you normally would. And I think if you're looking at projects in the fall, you probably need to start thinking about what that game plan is, depending on the type of venue that you're using. So if you're in a large convention center, you may need to provide access to washrooms in spaces that you're not using. If you're using a smaller venue, you may need to start thinking about washroom trailers or additional stalls. And this is stuff that you should be doing right now to figure out what that supply chain looks like, figure out where you're going to get this stuff from, and one of the things that can't happen with washrooms is you can't just create hour-long lineups at washrooms for a lot of reasons, and there's going to be a big need and a much bigger need for access to hand washing. So that's another thing to just start considering. Hand washing stations, as unattractive as they may be in an event, they're going to become a necessity, and you need to understand where you're going to get that from. Your venues are going to support you as much as they possibly can, but they're not going to be able to do it all by themselves. So everybody needs to be in tune with what the local health regulations are and what they're going to change to. And I think to echo, Sarah's statement is, we really are in this part of it together, and the venues are going to need the creativity of our whole entire industry to figure out how we're going to successfully start to host events again. So make sure you understand what your responsibility is in all of this, and understand what the rules are. And yeah, that's
one other thing too. Sorry, just to remind any venue operators that are on this call, we still have a responsibility to pay attention to all of the other stuff that we're responsible for as a venue. And we can't get so hyper focused on this that we don't pay attention to other things. So one, for instance, thing that I've heard is everybody just being like, oh, well, we'll just shift to outdoor venues and that'll be it. But you still have to think about, depending on where you are, what happens if you need a shelter in place facility? Can you still accommodate the right number of people so that you make sure that in an emergency situation, you're providing all of the necessary, resources to those guests? you can't put all of your focus on cleaning and then start to let your security be sacrificed or your communication plans or anything else. So again, just kind of encouraging venues that while you are starting to think about this, you really have to make sure that you're not letting any of your other operating procedures slide. If anything, this is a chance just for all of us to go through that again with a fine-tooth comb and say, what can we be doing to come out better on the other side of this thing?
That's a great point. I think I've already started to see in, the few shopping centers that are open and grocery stores, the security have become attendants for health and safety. And it's, I've wondered a couple times, like, are the security guards still doing their security guard job, or are they now just monitoring the cleaning of shopping carts? And I do think it's going to be really important that from a venue side, the resources that you're pulling to address the health and safety needs aren't pulling away from service and food and beverage and all the other things that go into a great experience. Because this is going to feel weird for a little bit, and I think there is going to be some social anxiety about being in big groups, and it's going to take a lot of work to get people into a place and get them to feel comfortable and not like it's a police state.
And I think, there's a conversation even kind of going on in the question answer box right now. So we'll tackle a couple of these of, what do you see different vendor groups, shifting their mindset when events come back? So AVs, decor, florists, caterers, what do you forecast their responsibilities looking like? And I think to Dustin's point, one of the most important things is that they're communicating whatever their new policies are, so that if there is a shortcoming, the venue can maybe help make up for it in some way, or so that they can work together to ensure that there are no gaps in the plan. I think Gary Boardman, it might have been, was kind of mentioning about, having extra staff to clean things in between shifts and wiping down. Like, that's great. And that's awesome that he can do that as a supplier. If he can't, then the venue or the event planner or somebody else needs to make sure that that staff is there. So again, a lot of it's going to come back to communication. I don't think there's necessarily going to be a black and white answer on what each provider is necessarily going to be responsible for, but I think everybody's responsible for making sure that it's a conversation. All hands on deck meetings are going to be more important than they've ever been as we kind of come back out of this. There's also some other questions, just while we're still on venues here, about some tactics that a venue can put in place to transfer the risk back to the patron, rather than having to absorb the financial risk of a potential lawsuit if someone were to contract COVID. So a lot of this, again, I'll refer people back to the webinar that we did a little while ago that is posted up on our website. There's a big discussion around liability, and one of the things with COVID, because of the way that it spreads, is it is extremely difficult to prove causation in terms of where something was caused. So actually, as a venue, or a producer or anyone else, your liability isn't that high, because for somebody to actually be able to prove that it was 100% your event, your venue, anything else is going to be extremely difficult. So I think we should focus maybe less on that and less on the litigious part of the conversation and more about what's responsible. And what's responsible is education. What's responsible is letting people know from the moment they're invited to an event, to the moment they park their car, or however they get there, to when they walk in your door, to even on their way out, reminding them you were just in a space with a lot of people. Wash your hands, take some time away from people if you need to, whatever it may be. So I'd encourage us, if we do start to panic too much and start to try to push everything else on somebody else's plate, we're never going to be able to come out of this, quickly, because we'll all have our guard up. And I don't know that that's necessarily the right way psychologically for us to try to jump back into this thing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And there's everybody is now going to hold a piece of the responsibility to operate in a safe way. And kind of back to the first comment there about what the vendor's responsibilities are, and just to double down, the vendor's responsibilities are to understand their product and services and how it impacts the overall program, and what you can do to make sure that whatever you're delivering, whatever service or whatever product is being delivered in the most responsible and healthy way. You can't assume that your the producer is going to understand, you know, where your gear has been before, how it needs to be handled, and it really is up to you to have that planned out. We can't wait for each other to tell each other what to do. We're all going to need to come to the table with a plan.
And I think also just with every, you know, with every hurdle that's going to get thrown at us, you know, whether it's how to fit extra hand washing stations in or whatever else, there's also going to be opportunity. That's going to be a new branding opportunity. And some signage or, you know, production company is going to come up with a really awesome way to make that just as cool of a feature as maybe your actual bar that, you know, is kind of anchoring your event space. So I'd also just kind of, again, let's try to stay on the positive side and just say, how can we take some of these things that are going to be the new norm, whether temporarily or permanent, and figure out what we can all do to get creative, because that's ultimately, you know, what we're trying to do is make people look at things differently and through a new set of eyes. And there could be a great way to do that. There's other things, questions about venues having to determine if attendees are couples or families who cohabitate and should be okay to sit and stand together. That I don't see as being your venue's responsibility. I don't think there's any way that we're going to be able to prove and do all of that stuff. But again, I think social distancing is going to have to be it's a temporary fix until we have either vaccines or herd immunity. Social distancing is absolutely going to be a thing, and it's going to be on the minds of the producers, the venues, and everyone else. But at some point, we're going to have to, you know, the pendulum's going to have to settle a little bit back in the middle, and we're going to have to figure out, you know, how to not be policing everybody's personal activity in terms of how they're attending the event. I think you're going to see a lot more of producers and planners, and maybe Dustin, you can weigh in on this as you kind of start to work with your clients again. I think you'll have people just kind of sending out reminders saying, you know, it is your responsibility to kind of take care of yourself in certain situations as well. And we want to facilitate this event, but you need to know the risks associated with it. And that proactive communication is really going to be what's going to happen first, as opposed to venues trying to regulate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. I know with our corporate clients, the policies that they maintain within their own spaces, they will continue to maintain those same policies when it comes to events. So I believe there will be a lot of communication, and I believe there's going to need to be a lot of communication to get the confidence to the attendees to actually come and attend. Attendees are going to want to know what measures are being put in place and what they can expect. I think that I would be very wary to show up to an event that didn't have a statement about what they were doing to ensure the safety of the attendees. And I do think that corporations are going to have different policies from corporation to corporation. Of course, everyone's going to follow the guidance of their local health officials, but I can already see in our market that we have corporations that will likely have rules and restrictions that are above and beyond for the safety of their employees and their clients. So yeah.
Great. Well, let's maybe shift over to the food and beverage topics a little bit, and I'll kind of throw out a couple things that we're seeing in here, Dustin, to give you some time to maybe think a little bit about it. There's a lot around sustainability and how we balance sustainability with, again, like disposables and that sort of thing. You know, what's going to be better moving forward. There's a lot about how do we maintain safety, whether it's sneeze guards on buffets or food displays, to whether or not we need screens up at bars like we're starting to see in grocery store cashier stations. There's also a lot that I've seen about, you know, what about networking and cocktail receptions? Is that a reality, or for a while are we going to see that you're actually going to get, you know, a little snack box delivered to your hotel room, and your host is going to tell you to eat before you come downstairs? You know, what do we kind of see this looking like for a while?
Well, I think the question about disposables and sustainability is a really fair one, because I think that, you know, there has been a big shift towards more sustainable events, and I feel like that is going to take a little bit of a hit here. Something to keep in mind, though, is that dishware that has been processed through a high temperature dishwasher gets handled the same amount as disposables, really. I mean, you still have to get it from point A to point B. So I don't know that we're going to see this sort of disposable only world where all we're using is disposables. I can see that happening in the beginning, but that's not going to last very long. There is definitely, I can see the screens being added. I think that is going to come from the venues to protect their employees. When an employee is in a fixed spot and they can't move away from that spot to get away from a crowd or whatever, it wouldn't surprise me to see that. I'm not entirely sure how we're going to all build that into our our design, but I can see the screens being added, and anywhere that you have employees working next to each other for a long period of time and you can't maintain that distance, the screens will definitely come into play. Yeah, those were any other.
What about buffets? Like, do you see people going away from buffets altogether? Do you see them just staffing them and doing more, servers? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think buffets are not going to be an option. I think that that decision's going to get made for us. I think most areas are going to put a ban on any sort of open food. So I can see the buffets taking a hit for quite some time. They're definitely, we're in the conversations we're having with our clients about food and beverage, without knowing exactly where we're going to end up. The conversation is really about much smaller portions put out at a time. So everything stays back of house and sealed, and it's brought out piece by piece or in very small quantities so that you don't have large quantities of food that could be contaminated. There's this big conversation about, will everything become a seated plated dinner? And who knows, but a seated plated dinner is actually, in a lot of cases, could be worse because you're sitting next to somebody for an extended period of time. And I know that where I am, so I'm in Canada, and our health officials are putting restrictions on the amount of time you can stay in a group. So that amount of time is going to be important as we have discussions about what does the flow of an event look like? Is it not better to have people more free flowing so that they can manage their own personal space, as opposed to sitting at a table where even if we start putting 4 people at a 60-inch round, you're still in that space with other people. So yeah, I'm seeing here from Brandon, I've heard some states releasing information regarding 6 guests per 60-inch round, alternating empty rows for ceremony. Yeah, we're seeing similar stuff. I know on a personal note, I would prefer not to be sitting at a table right now. I'd prefer to have the freedom to go to any corner of the room that I want to and maintain my own personal space. But yeah, it won't surprise me if we don't see very specific rules coming out from the health officials about what an event setup will look like. And I hope that everybody that's on this call, I hope that you are reaching out to your local health officials to help them make these decisions. Because I assure you that wherever you are, in most cases, the people that are making these decisions are not the ones that do the work all the time. So there's a great opportunity for you to get involved in these decisions. I know that our local health authority has been more than open to take feedback from the community about what this could look like. And it's best to get ahead of that before they start telling you what to do.
Yeah, and one thing that Greg Jenkins just mentioned in the chat is, and this I think is going to go for both food and beverage and for just venue operations, is moving to touchless as much as possible. And where are you eliminating your points of contact? So, in many places, depending on what your fire marshal guidelines and regulations are, you can or can't leave doors propped open, crash bars, that sort of thing. I think you are going to see a lot changing in terms of doors, maybe even in terms of food, so that, again, to Dustin's point, it's not sitting there. Maybe there's some different sort of conveyor belt opportunities where things are being served and we're eliminating human points of contact. I think this might expedite the feeling that we're going to live like the Jetsons, for anybody who remembered that cartoon. I don't know. Maybe I just dated myself for everybody on the call, but there's definitely a lot going on in that space. But again, it's going to be regional, and that's part of what we're going to have to deal with as well. Is there are going to be guidelines, and then there are going to be laws, and we're going to have to figure out the difference between them and figure out how we operate effectively. One question that came up on Tuesday, which we didn't get a chance to get to, and I think is an interesting conversation, and I'd actually really love to have people on the call weigh in here as well, is about disclosure. And if you do have an attendee at your event that ends up, having COVID, what is your responsibility, whether it's as a producer or as a venue or anything, to share that information, not just to the event attendees, but also to potential future clients. And I think it's going to be interesting because some of this we may have control over, some of it we may not. If you see the contact tracing technologies that they have in South Korea and some other places, you know, you don't get to choose whether or not people know if someone who had COVID was or wasn't at your facility. It's kind of out there and it's available through technology. But I also think there's an ethical responsibility that, you know, you don't want people who may have been in contact with someone to be walking around unintentionally infecting people. So I think venues and producers are really going to need to talk to each other and get on the same page about what their plans are going to be in a situation like that. So if anybody has started to have those conversations, whether you might be looking at hosting even a small family thing like a wedding or something else, definitely let us know what your thoughts are there. There's some questions also about, as an industry, do we have an advocate group that is lobbying and working with the health authorities to come up with the recommendations together? And this is a great question, and this is a lot about what associations like ILEA and MPI and EIC and all of these groups are about. We've also gotten a specific question about whether or not anybody from ILEA is sitting on these task forces. I know we have, ILEA has been directly in touch with the Event Safety Alliance, and we are working very closely with them on these guidelines that are going to be coming out. We're also doing our part to share those. We are not a lobbying association in terms of spending money and having somebody hired to go lobby government. But again, we're using our platform to encourage all of our chapters to be talking to their convention and visitors bureaus and all of their local government agencies to really say, here's some things we're working on. This is how we can proactively contribute to the conversation. I know my team has people on the governor's task force in California about reopening. So we do encourage involvement as much as possible. You'll also see that on our website, on our COVID page, we do have the ability to share information. And I think what we're asking in return is you to share information with us. So you'll probably see some surveys and other things coming out about how has this impacted your business? What are you struggling with the most coming out of this? You know, what are the hardest adjustments for you to make? Because that's the type of information that we as an association need to be able to take back and run up the ladder later. There's also an opportunity for any of you who are having petitions or other things, whether it's for financial aid or awareness or advocacy. There's a form on our website that you can fill out so that we can help share that at more of the national and international level for you, so that we can try to amplify your voice on that front as well. So those are a couple ways that I know ILEA is getting involved in the conversation.
Right. There's a question here. Does anyone have a real life example of an event you're planning in the upcoming months and what you're doing for this specific event? So yeah, I can tell you a little bit about an event we're working on at the end of the year. It's a fairly large holiday party. We're planning for, we're being optimistic and saying that yes, it's going to happen to begin with. And we're actually planning it to be a roaming event where not all the attendees will be in the same room at the same time. So they will move in groups and they will go into a couple different environments at a time with space in between each so that we can refresh and clean the room. It's turning what would normally be a gala into more of a longer format, starts in the afternoon, groups show up at a certain time. So we're not currently planning any large scale gatherings that have a large amount of people in one room at one time. Most of our clients are not feeling comfortable with that, and I don't know that we're going to be in the space for that. Keep in mind, I am in Canada, in Alberta, so everybody is going to be a little bit different. I know there's places in the United States that are looking to open up a lot sooner than we are, but definitely some more creative options in how do you take a whole bunch of people, put them through the same experience. The only difference is they're not going to experience it together. They're going to experience it into smaller groups. We're also switching a fairly large children's party into a drive-through experience, almost like it's a small world, something with Disney. So it's more of a drive-through experience. Everybody stays in their car and all the activity happens around them. And then at the end, they get their presents put in the trunk by some elves and they go home with a little cookie decorating kit and their presents, and they never get out of their car. They stay with their families. So so definitely it's looking like a very, very different world for us. And yeah, those are a couple things that we're working on. I definitely welcome anybody that has anything that they're working on and some creative solutions to throw it in the chat box and share.
One other thing that popped up, this is Steve Way's question, is as we all need to be responsible solutions for cleaning, safety, PPE, et cetera, how do you see the accountability aspect working, and who becomes the person having authority responsible for creating and enforcing policies? And I think the answer is everyone, right? As a venue, you need to be responsible and make sure that you're holding your vendors accountable. I know we certainly have vendor guidelines for our venue that we are going through and taking a fine tooth comb to and changing some of our requirements in that front. I think also as the producer or planner, your duty of care is first and foremost. And that's part of the reason why people are hiring professionals, and I can't enforce it enough. This is part of how we prove our value as professionals. We need to be having the conversation with our clients about how important it is to be keeping people safe, and that you need to be trained and you need to be willing to hold people responsible. And that's part of what they're paying us for. And so I'd really encourage our planners and producers to give some thought to how they're going to have that conversation with clients, how they're going to say, I have the courage to hold my vendors accountable, make sure my venue is doing their cleaning, and make sure that I'm being as responsible as I can for you so that we can keep your guests safe. And then I think it comes down to also the client, like they have a responsibility to make sure that they're not asking for things that are going to put people in difficult situations. And so again, there's going to have to be a lot of transparent conversations. I don't think at the end of the day, there could be any one person that's ultimately responsible. I think we just all need to make sure to take that on ourselves and know that it's something that, especially in the short term, as we're climbing back out of this, that we all need to pay attention to from start to finish.
I think of PPE is already a thing that our industry is really serious about. When you go to work in a venue, they're going to have their restrictions or their requirements for PPE during the setup. And this really is no different. There's going to be a requirement for PPE, and it's going to be managed no differently than wearing hard hats when you're rigging, no differently than harnesses in a lift. We're already doing this. We already know how to do this. When you go to a venue, they don't hand you a hard hat. You bring your own because it's a requirement. And I think that's what we need to prepare for, is that the PPE for the guest falls on the responsibility of the guest and then the producer who's putting it on. So if you don't want your guests to bring your own, then you need to provide it for them. I can't see a situation where the venues are going to be the ones holding the responsibility to hand out masks, but I definitely can see the venue being in a position where they're insisting that they be worn. So yeah, I think that that we're already doing this. We're already practicing great safety practices. We've been on an uphill climb when it comes to safety in our industry for a long time, and this is just going to be an extension of that work.
There are, let's see, a couple other questions here. If you ask an attendee to bring their own, but they forget, don't you need to have those on hand? And I think, yeah, that's exactly what we're saying is, that's going to be a shared responsibility. And luckily, I think the good thing is lots of people are thinking about this. So to Dustin's point, if a guest comes and doesn't have one, hopefully the client does, because they were thinking ahead. I want to make sure that everybody can get in. Right. And if the client doesn't have one, hopefully the venue does, because they're thinking, I want to make sure that I'm 100% supporting my client and making sure that nobody doesn't have the opportunity to participate in this event. So I think for a while, you're going to see an abundance of this stuff. The hard part is, how do we all make sure that we keep it going, and that we don't get too lax with certain things? And I think that's where, to Dustin's point, just like OSHA regulations and everything else, it's going to start being part of how we work and how we manage these things. Other questions? Go ahead, Dustin.
No, there's some great stuff in the chat here. Greg just posted, I listened to a webinar and there's some real talks about having someone quickly take attendees' temperature before they enter a venue with guests coming from many regions.
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit just from the large event venue perspective. There's a lot of conversation going on about, touchless thermometers. And for smaller events, that's certainly something that you can potentially do. For larger events and ultimately for mass gatherings, it's really coming to thermal imaging technology. And basically, there are either completely separate systems that you can install that is just like the old, it's that movie, like not Terminator, but where it's running through the forest and he's all heat mapped. But anyways, they can basically just scan everyone to be taking their temperatures on the way in. I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of that. The other benefit to that is that it actually creates even more security for you in some other ways, because it triggers different security systems to then kick into play. So there's a lot of conversation going on in that space right now. And then with regard to isolation rooms, just like any other issue that you have, if you're at a concert, you always have sobriety tanks for people and other things that you need. I think we're seeing a lot in the mental health space. We're trying to make sure that, kids with autism have rooms like sensory deprivation rooms so that they're a little bit more comfortable. This is going to be another one of those things that we just need to think about. And what is the right type of room augmentation that we have to have given our client profile and who we're trying to accommodate for these events. So it's certainly something, I think on the talent side, you may start seeing a lot more talent be specific in terms of their green room requests and other things. I know that's coming up a little bit, but certainly, making sure that either that room wasn't used before or you're going to start seeing people want to be a little bit more separated than they've been in the past. So Predator, there it is. Thanks, Lisa. It's exactly what I was looking for. But there's a lot that's going on, but again, it's going to take us a while to implement this stuff. And I think the other thing that we need to be careful about is the difference in resources. And major venues are going to be able to probably implement technologies that smaller venues aren't, but smaller venues are going to be critical to how we start to open up. And so figuring out the right way, to make sure that some of these smaller venues and other groups have the resources that they need to keep people safe is going to be really important coming forward.
I'd be curious to see if there is how private security companies are ramping up. I'd be curious to see what businesses out there are coming up with the right technology and the right solutions to provide assistance to some of these smaller venues that don't have the resources or the big teams to do this. And that's something we'd love to talk about. So if you guys know of anybody that is in the private security world or the event security world that is putting some technology in place or is changing their service offerings, we would love to hear more about them. So drop it in the chat or drop us an email at any time. We'd love to talk to them.
Dustin, what about the conversation? We talk a lot about our clients and our guests, but what about our staff? And some of the challenges that we're going to go through in terms of how much flexibility do you provide your staff to do all of the lead up work, but if they're not comfortable being on the floor, making accommodations for them, how are you kind of approaching some of that?
Yeah, well, I've said from the beginning that my staff don't go back to work until we can ensure that it's safe to do so. And I think a lot of businesses are going to be that way as well. I was listening to the news this morning about some frontline workers that were in the food and beverage industry. I think a coffee shop at an airport, and the girl that worked there was terrified to death to go back to work. She was absolutely terrified to do it, and it really did get me thinking about our industry and about how comfortable are our frontline staff going to be going back into this, and what do we need to do to make sure that they are protected and safe. So I think as we start thinking about our own staff when they come back to work, it's going to be about length of time, proximity. It's going to be about making sure that they always have the resources that they need to make sure that their hands can be clean, to make sure that we're never putting them in a situation where they can't keep a safe distance. So really, I mean, it's everything that we're being told to do for ourselves, and now we need to put it into the lens of our employees. And I'm lucky in the way that my team doesn't have a lot of really close proximity work. They definitely work together, but they're not. I think when you start talking about service staff and bartenders and people that by the nature of the job have a close proximity and they are in the same spot for a long time, those are going to be the positions that we really need to think about. How do we get them in the most comfortable and safe place for them. I will be, as a business owner and you know, as somebody that has a team, I will be very open to listen to my employees and to what makes them feel comfortable and what does not make them feel comfortable. I have no intentions on forcing somebody to do work that they're not comfortable with. In Alberta or Canada, you have the right to refuse unsafe work, so you can't be penalized in any way to say I cannot do this because it's safe. And I'm sure it's probably quite similar in the US or wherever else you're listening. So yeah, so I think, you know, we've already started building a good supply chain for all of the necessary PPE that we need for our employees, and training to make sure that they know what they need to do to stay safe. And I don't know that there's a whole lot more you can do after that. Some reassurance that we're going to do it properly, I think, has been a big thing for my team. We're still months away from going back to work, but we've already started communicating what we've learned about cleaning products, where supplies are coming from, who we're partnering with, to keep them involved along the way. And the thing that I would never want for anybody in this industry is to show up to work and not know what is going on, or not know everything that they need to know. So my team knows more about cleaning chemicals than they ever thought they would, because it's now important. It's important that they know.
Yeah. The other thing that we're trying to do is really think about, obviously our industry has been decimated by this, but how can we help some of the other industries who maybe have an opportunity to come back a little bit faster? And not everybody's going to be in this position, but as a large venue, one of the ways we're looking at it is, restaurants and theaters, right? They're having a really hard time. So can we, again, create new events that keep people a little bit further apart, have some of these restaurants maybe not be operating even at their own facility, but be operating somewhere else. And so I think really, again, reaching out and thinking about not just the position you're in, but what position are some other people in, may be a really good way to start some proactive conversations about how we can work together to come up with some ideas similar to Dustin's, It's a Small World Christmas that they're doing, and make it a little bit different, and try to find something new.
Mm-hmm. Oftentimes your employees are going to, or your team, they're gonna find the best solutions for you, especially when you're in a product or a service that they're directly dealing with all the time. Look to your team to give you those answers. Look to your team to find out what the best road forward is going to be, because in most cases, and I know we found this within our own team, is even the handling of products, they actually understand that so much better than I do, and they're invested in keeping themselves safe and our stakeholders and our guests safe. So they've been our biggest asset to come to the table. And if you're a larger organization, or you're a venue, or you're a vendor, put a small team together and pull from the people that know your business best, and get them to the table and get them talking. It's the best way to start.
Any other questions? Let's see, there's a couple more on food and beverage. Food trucks is something that's, coming up a little bit, or at least came up on Tuesday, and people's level of comfort with food trucks. I think, similar to any food service, we just need to look at the operation in its totality. How clean is the truck itself? How careful are they being about, their personal hygiene as they're serving? What are the points of interaction between the servers and the guests? So I don't think food trucks necessarily are going to, are just going to go the way of the dodo because of this, because I think a lot of people are actually going to feel like that's a very controlled environment that you can create, and especially the flexibility given, being able to be flexible with outdoor spaces and other things. So I do think food trucks are something that still have a future that can live on. It's just, again, make sure you know what they're doing inside that food truck so that we can keep everybody safe.
Yeah, Kimberly Bone, my friend here from Canada, she writes, how do we balance the need for attendees to wear masks and their need to consume food and beverage? At some point, the mask needs to come off during the course of the event. I don't know that I have a specific answer to that, but I can definitely acknowledge where that will start to conflict. I don't know that mask wearing is necessarily, it's the way I understand it is it's you should be wearing your mask when you're in close proximity to people. So if you're eating or drinking, that's going to be your cue to step away from a larger group. I totally agree that it's going to be very difficult to wear all this PPE and still enjoy, and it's going to be different for sure. I think a lot of food and beverage is going to get reduced for a lot of events. I think it's going to get to the point where it's too complicated, and we're going to see a lot of events with way less food and beverage offerings. Sorry for all the food and beverage and venue people out there.
Yeah, I've seen a lot too of people being like, you know, can we have people self-select, and if they attend an event, kind of divide themselves by color and say, I'm red, I'm actually really comfortable still interfacing with people, and I'm yellow, I like to have 3 feet instead of 6 feet, and I'm green, stay away from me, I'm only going to reach out if you're 20 feet away. And I think, to Dustin's point, we can't overcomplicate things. We're humans. There's an element to us that is unpredictable. We can plan for as much as we want, but we also need to be a little bit flexible. So while I think in the short term we can give some thought to what are creative ways to change things, when we're looking at past appetizers, maybe you can still do past appetizers, but the person passing, obviously everything was put on a tray with gloves, they're wearing a mask, and maybe they're individual bento boxes of things that you're passing, as opposed to anything that is actually, exposed to other guests when somebody takes something off a tray. So we're going to need to think through all of that stuff. But if we over-engineer it to the point that it's not enjoyable anymore, we're going to cause ourselves more problem than just trying to get through the logistical issues of things. So it's going to be a tricky balance for all of us, I'm sure.
Greg says social distancing with barricades, where to stand signs will be critical to manage food trucks. Yeah, I think all of our lessons that we've learned in crowd control are going to all start coming to the surface, and how we get people to move around is going to be really important.
There is an interesting conversation around, again, even just from the people that we have on this call, if you were being asked to attend an event where you're being asked to be 6 feet away from people at all times, would you go, or do you feel like that event doesn't hold value? I'd be interested if you guys can populate into the chat box, are you really going to attend while social distancing is as much of an issue as it is right now? Or would that be a deal breaker for you? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of no's come up, which is why I think, and absolutely it depends on the type of the event. But that's where we're going to have to learn, and that's where we're going to have to give ourselves time to heal from this whole thing. There will be things that we can do in the short term, but that's why vaccines and that's why herd immunity and everything else is going to be so important, because at a certain point, events are not going to be economically feasible, and they're not going to have the same impact that they have if we're so structured that we're keeping everybody in a bubble. So I think it'll be interesting to watch as we start to kind of put our toe back in the water here.
Mm-hmm. That's a good comment. No, the attendee and client would need to still see value. That's a very good point. Yeah, we can tell from the chat that we're not ready to have an event just yet.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling that way, your guests are feeling the same way too.
And I think that's the other thing is, we've got to be okay with that. We've got to be okay with saying we're not quite ready. We're hoping to get there soon. And I understand that that's a really difficult part to be in, especially because, people are trying to put food on their table and a roof over their head. But again, there's part of being professional is making sure that we can do it right when we do it. And if we're still at this little bit of stage of hesitation, I think it's going to take a couple brave people to get out there and really test it and do it. And I hope those first people that do it are very informed people and very responsible people too, because as we know, we can very quickly ruin this for ourselves too by having a couple bad events right out of the gate and having everybody shut us down again. And so I think, it's on all of us to make sure that we're holding our peers accountable as well. As we're starting to see people do events, see what you can do to help them, even if it's not your event. See if you can introduce them to somebody who is best in class in what they do, so that they can try to pull a great team together to do this correctly.
Awesome. I think that is the perfect spot to end this. And that was the perfect note. We're at 12:55 already. These things sure do fly by. Yeah, Corinne, are you here to take us back to the finish line?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
So I would just like to remind everybody to sign up for upcoming webinars. A nice sort of follow-up to this conversation will be on Tuesday, where we'll have Tahira Endine, the head of events for Site Global, and Jason Megson, who's the managing director and VP at George P. Johnson from the UK. They're going to be talking about the next steps and what the future of experiential will look like what's it going to look like in the next 3 months? What will it look like in the next year? So kind of taking this conversation and coming up with some, specific ideas of what we might be able to do to engage our attendees and provide value for our clients. And then the following week on Tuesday, on May 19th, we will have Nikki Knuckles, who's the creative director from Doodle Dog Creative in Austin. And she's going to have really tangible tips and ideas for how you can optimize your digital presence right now, from like website audits, online marketing, things that you can do yourself to help get your brand out there and help engage with your customers and potential customers. And as mentioned before, ILEAHub.com has the resources. It has all the webinars that we've produced so far are there for you to go back and review. There's some documents that have come out with the questions from some of the different webinars, and so there's different resources on there. And that's also where you can sign up for the 2 webinars that are upcoming. We encourage you to utilize the ILEA community and the Open Member Forum to share your thoughts, any resources, questions you might have for your fellow members. You can also follow us on Instagram for up-to-date info on the weekly webinars and Zoom meetings, ILEA Member Connect on Facebook. And yeah, I would just like you to have a great day and hope to see you in the coming weeks.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye.
See everybody again very soon.
Yes.